Before we dive in, if you love cinema history, film analysis, and the strange dialogue movies have across decades, make sure to subscribe to Mr. Smithee and hit the like button. It really helps the channel bring more of these deep dives into the history of film to life. When we talk about remakes, most people instinctively roll their eyes. The word suggests laziness, repetition, or the cynical exploitation of a brand. And yet, cinema history tells us another story. Some remakes are not only as good as their originals, but in certain cases, they become definitive, transforming the material into something new, something vital. Today, we're diving into a journey across time and space. From Hollywood to Europe, from horror to noir, from spectacle to intimacy, to explore those rare cases where a remake stands shoulder to shoulder with its predecessor. Lee Thompson's Cape Fear from 1962 is already a masterclass in suspense. Robert Mitchum, with his lazy drawl and shark-like eyes, embodies pure menace against Gregory Peck's straight-arrow lawyer. It's taut, economical, and rooted in Cold War fears about moral corruption. Then, in 1991, Martin Scorsese approached the same material, but infused it with his own obsessions. De Niro's Max Cady isn't just a criminal. He's a biblical force, covered in tattoos of scripture, as if quoting God and Nietzsche in the same breath. Scorsese uses expressionistic lighting, distorted camera angles, and Bernard Herrmann's score, reorchestrated by Elmer Bernstein, to create a fever dream. Where Thompson gave us suspense, Scorsese gave us nightmare. Two versions, equally valid, equally haunting. Remakes thrive in horror because fear itself changes with each generation. The Fly, 1958, with its help me, ending, is pure Cold War anxiety, the fear of science tampering with nature. But David Cronenberg's 1986 remake turns it into a tragic opera. Jeff Goldblum's Seth Brundle mutating into a grotesque creature is both terrifying and heartbreaking. It's a metaphor for disease, often read through the lens of the AIDS crisis, but it's also about human frailty and doomed love. And then there's The Thing. Hawks and Nibby's 1951 version is about scientists versus a monster coded as atomic age paranoia. Carpenter's 1982 remake is entirely different. Nihilistic, grotesque, and profoundly unsettling. The creature is no longer humanoid, but an amorphous, unknowable terror. Rob Bottin's practical effects remain unmatched, forcing us to confront the horror of bodies turning alien. The original was about invasion. Carpenter's remake is about distrust, isolation, and the impossibility of knowing the truth. Akira Kurosawa might be the most remade director in history. His Seven Samurai, 1954, is monumental. Over 3 hours, weaving action, humor, and deep humanism into the story of farmers hiring warriors for protection. When John Sturges remade it as The Magnificent Seven, 1960, the setting moved from Japan to Mexico, and the samurai became gunslingers. What's remarkable is how well the structure survived the translation. The stoicism of samurai code becomes the rugged honor of the cowboy. Different costumes, same myth. And then Yojimbo, 1961. Kurosawa crafted a blackly comic tale of a wandering Ronin manipulating rival gangs. Sergio Leone, inspired almost shot for shot, transformed it into a fistful of dollars, 1964. With Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name, Leone stripped dialogue to the bone, relied on operatic close-ups, and unleashed Ennio Morricone's revolutionary score. This wasn't just a remake. It was the birth of the spaghetti western, a new cinematic language altogether. Some remakes wrestle with icons. King Kong, 1933, is one of the foundational myths of cinema. Stop-motion wonder, Beauty and the Beast, the Empire State Climax. When Dino De Laurentiis produced the 1976 remake, critics accused it of hubris. But in retrospect, it's fascinating. Jessica Lange's performance adds sensuality. The oil crisis backstory reflects 1970s anxieties about greed and corporate power. Kong atop the Twin Towers became a symbolic updating of America's fears. The same goes for Scarface. Hawke's 1932 original is lean, violent, and scandalous for its time, inspired by Al Capone. 50 years later, Brian De Palma and Oliver Stone reimagined it in Miami's cocaine underworld. Pacino's Tony Montana is excess personified, vulgar, grotesque, yet magnetic. If Hawke's Scarface is about prohibition and the American dream in shorthand, De Palma's is a Baroque tragedy about capitalism, immigrant ambition, and cocaine-fueled megalomania. Both films scandalize their eras. Both stand as defining gangster epics. Adapted from Ernest Hemingway's short story, Robert Siodmak's The Killers expanded a brief episode into a full-blown noir masterpiece, with Burt Lancaster and Ava Gardner defining archetypes of doomed hero and femme fatale. Nearly 2 decades later, Don Siegel remade it, originally for television, but too violent for the networks. His 1964 version, starring Lee Marvin and John Cassavetes, is leaner, harsher, and drenched in 60s cynicism. Where Siodmak's film is shadowy and fatalistic, Siegel's is brutal and pragmatic. Both, however, are essential, twin reflections of how American crime cinema evolved from the romantic fatalism of the 40s to the cold-blooded realism of the 60s. Remakes also chart globalization. Infernal Affairs, 2002, is one of Hong Kong's finest thrillers, sleek and efficient. Only 101 minutes. It's a duel of identities. A cop undercover as a gangster undercover as a cop. A pure high-concept masterpiece. When Scorsese remade it as The Departed, 2006, he didn't just translate it. He expanded it, embedding it in Boston's Irish-American crime world. He added Catholic guilt, political corruption, and Scorsese's trademark operatic violence. At nearly 3 hours, The Departed is messier than Infernal Affairs, but also richer in character detail. Both films excel, one as a razor-sharp thriller, the other as sprawling crime opera. Henri-Georges Clouzot's The Wages of Fear, 1953, is a masterpiece of tension. 4 desperate men, hired to drive trucks of nitroglycerin across impossible terrain. Every bump in the road is potential death. It's pure existentialism. Men facing mortality for money they'll never enjoy. William Friedkin's Sorcerer, 1977, is not just a remake, but a descent into hell. The title itself, strange and misleading, reflects Friedkin's obsession with fate. The jungle is oppressive, the atmosphere suffocating. The famous sequence of trucks crossing a rotting rope bridge in a storm feels like Herzog's Aguirre colliding with industrial horror. It bombed on release, overshadowed by Star Wars, but today it's recognized as one of Friedkin's masterpieces, perhaps even deeper and darker than Clouzot's original. Murnau's Nosferatu, 1922, is cinema's first great horror feature, unauthorized, unofficial, yet elemental. Werner Herzog's Nosferatu the Vampire, 1979, is a poetic homage. Klaus Kinski plays Dracula with melancholy, as though cursed with eternal loneliness. It's less horror than elegy, an ode to decay and longing. If Renoir's La Chienne is a film steeped in the ironies of French society between wars, Lang's Scarlet Street reimagines the story through the paranoid lens of post-war America. Renoir observes his characters with detached irony. The meek cashier, the manipulative prostitute, the cruel lover. His gaze is one of amused fatalism, a recognition of human weakness. Lang, on the other hand, brings his German expressionist shadow to Hollywood, creating a suffocating moral universe where destiny feels inescapable. Edward G. Robinson's Clerk is crushed not only by passion, but by an oppressive moral order, where sin is punished with existential despair. The same story, but told through 2 cultural prisms. Renoir's sly humanism against Lang's tragic determinism. Meanwhile, Jim McBride's Breathless, 1983, remakes Goddard's revolutionary 1960 film. Goddard shattered cinematic language with jump cuts and pop culture cool. McBride's remake transplants that energy into neon-lit Los Angeles, with Richard Gere in a manic performance. It's not as historically important, but it's fascinating as an American translation of French New Wave modernism. François Truffaut's L'Homme que aimait les femmes is a tender, melancholic portrait of a man who collects fleeting encounters with women like fragments of poetry. It ends not with comedy, but with a meditation on love and death. Blake Edwards remade it in 1983 with Burt Reynolds, turning it into an American romantic comedy. Satirical, ironic, less delicate, but intriguing as a cultural shift. Where Truffaut mourns desire, Edwards laughs at it. The remake may lack the original's depth, but it proves how the same premise can carry two entirely different worldviews. It is rare to see a filmmaker remake his own film. Leo McCarey did exactly that. First with Love Affair in 1939, then almost shot for shot with An Affair to Remember in 1957. The stories are the same. A romance interrupted, a fateful meeting atop the Empire State Building. But the difference lies in tone and texture. Love Affair is delicate, restrained, marked by Charles Boyer and Irene Dunn's chemistry in the late 1930s. An Affair to Remember, starring Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr, is lush, melodramatic, and colored by the widescreen glamour of the 1950s. It is as though McCarey wanted to see the same melody played again, this time with a full orchestra instead of a string quartet. Some argue the first is purer, others prefer the Technicolor glow of the second. Both remain cornerstones of Hollywood romantic cinema. When Hitchcock returned to the man who knew too much 2 decades after the original, he wasn't simply repeating himself. The 1934 version is brisk, running just over 75 minutes, full of energy and British wit. It's a thriller of set pieces, culminating in the climactic shootout at the Albert Hall. Efficient, clever, already showcasing Hitchcock's genius for suspense. But in 1956, Hitchcock was no longer a young British director making his name. He was the master of suspense, working at the height of his Hollywood powers. His remake is expansive, in color and widescreen, with James Stewart and Doris Day embodying the anxieties of American middle-class tourists caught in Cold War intrigue. Where the first film is playful and compact, the remake is grand, psychological, even operatic. Hitchcock slows the pace, digging deeper into the emotions of parental fear, of ordinary people swallowed by geopolitics. The famous Albert Hall sequence is now stretched to a near unbearable length. Pure Hitchcockian control of tension. If the 1934 film is a master sketch, the 1956 remake is the fully painted canvas. Few directors embody Hollywood spectacle like Cecil B. DeMille. His 1923 The Ten Commandments was a silent epic, ambitious in scale, but also bifurcated. Part biblical story, part modern-day morality tale about sin and redemption. It was innovative but still tethered to the silent era's limitations. In 1956, DeMille returned to the material with widescreen grandeur, Technicolor, and the full weight of Hollywood's golden age resources. This wasn't merely a remake. It was self-mythologizing, a director revisiting his greatest triumph with the tools to finally realize it on a colossal scale. Charlton Heston's Moses is not just a prophet, but a monumental icon, embodying the 1950s mix of religious fervor and Cold War moral certainty. Where the silent version experiments with structure, the 1956 film is a monumental pageant designed to awe. The Parting of the Red Sea became one of cinema's most iconic spectacles, a visual metaphor for divine power rendered through state-of-the-art special effects. DeMille's remake is less personal than Hitchcock's, but it's a declaration of what Hollywood could do at its most extravagant. If Hitchcock's redo was about depth, DeMille's was about scale. Both reveal how a director, confronting his past work, can reframe it for a new era. Few stories adapt so well to changing eras as Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Don Siegel's 1956 film is McCarthy-era paranoia. Philip Kaufman's 1978 version captures post-Watergate distrust and the breakdown of social bonds. Abel Ferrara's 1993 take is bleaker, infused with urban decay and existential despair. The story works because every generation has its own fear of conformity, of losing individuality to some larger, faceless system. And then there's Ocean's 11. The 1960 Rat Pack film is a time capsule of Vegas cool, but narratively clunky. Steven Soderbergh's 2001 remake is pure cinematic jazz, sleek, witty, self-aware, with Clooney and Pitt embodying effortless charm. A case where the remake actually surpasses the original in craft. Not all remakes announce themselves. Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo, 1959, is often cited by critics like Andre Bazin as the perfect example of pure cinema. Hawks himself remade in 1967 as El Dorado, with John Wayne again leading, this time alongside Robert Mitchum. But the most radical remake came from John Carpenter. Assault on Precinct 13, 1976, strips away the Western trappings but keeps the siege narrative intact. The sheriff's office becomes a police precinct. The outlaw siege becomes an urban nightmare. It's lean, brutal, and modernist. Hawks' DNA, but shot through with Carpenter's minimalist dread. These unofficial remakes prove how influence can echo across genres, mutating as it travels. When we talk about unofficial remakes, one of the most fascinating examples is Brian De Palma's Obsession, 1976. On the surface, it's a mystery melodrama. Cliff Robertson plays a man haunted by the death of his wife and daughter in a botched kidnapping, only to meet years later a woman who looks exactly like his lost love. But anyone who has seen Hitchcock's Vertigo, 1958, will immediately recognize the DNA. Hitchcock's Vertigo is a towering film, a dreamlike descent into obsession, control, and the illusion of love. James Stewart Scotty is consumed by the desire to remake a woman into his fantasy, with San Francisco itself becoming a labyrinth of desire and death. De Palma takes that structure but filters it through his own preoccupations. Obsession is drenched in Catholic guilt and Baroque imagery. Shot by Vilmo Zsigmond, the film's hazy, soft-focus visuals turn New Orleans and Florence into haunted cathedrals of memory. Bernard Herrmann, Hitchcock's longtime collaborator, composed the score, and it may be his most operatic, swelling strings that suggest both romance and damnation. Where Hitchcock was clinical in dissecting obsession, De Palma is operatic, feverish. His film is less about control than about trauma, guilt, and the destructive force of memory. Some critics dismissed Obsession as mere imitation, but in truth, it's more like a seance, De Palma channeling Hitchcock, but turning the material into a deeply personal confession. Unofficial remakes like this remind us that influence can be both homage and reinvention. Just as Carpenter transmuted Rio Bravo into Assault on Precinct 13, De Palma transformed Vertigo into a modern Gothic tragedy. Less perfect, perhaps, but haunting in its own right. West Side Story. The 1961 film is iconic, born of Broadway, but elevated by Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins' direction. Its choreography, color, and energy made it a landmark. Few thought anyone would dare remake it. But in 2021, Steven Spielberg did, and against all odds, his version is not redundant. It's urgent, politically sharper, with a cast that reflects the Puerto Rican community authentically. Spielberg's camera reinvents the musical form, gliding through streets, integrating song and movement seamlessly. This is not nostalgia. It's a renewal, proof that even the most sacred classics can be reborn. Few remakes divide cinephiles as sharply as Abel Ferrara's Bad Lieutenant and Werner Herzog's so-called reimagining. Ferrara's film is urban decay distilled. Harvey Keitel naked in both body and soul, stumbling through a Catholic nightmare of guilt, sin, and fleeting redemption. It is confessional cinema, obscene and spiritual at once. Herzog's Bad Lieutenant. Port of Call New Orleans is something else entirely. He does not remake Ferrara so much as abduct the title and transform it into his own fever dream. Nicolas Cage becomes the vessel, hunched, delirious, eyes blazing with madness. A figure as volcanic and unpredictable as Klaus Kinski in Herzog's classics. Where Ferrara explores damnation and grace, Herzog revels in absurdity and cosmic chaos. The iguanas on the table, the breakdancing soul, images that collapse realism into hallucination. Two films with the same name, but different universes. Ferrara as the confessor of urban sin, Herzog as the explorer of delirium. Remakes are often accused of being lesser by definition, but as we've seen, some remakes equal, or even surpass, their originals. They're not thefts, but reinterpretations. They show us that cinema is a living art, always rewriting itself, always in dialogue with its own history. If you enjoyed this journey through remakes, give this video a like, subscribe to Mr. Smithee, and tell us in the comments, which remake do you think stands shoulder to shoulder with the original?